listening to Big World Network.
Just Kill Me, Season 4, Episode 1, House Arrest. Written by Wendy Herman. Read by Wendy Herman. It was 2 a.m. I'd been allowed to remain in my house, but only temporarily, I was told. The boys were still sleeping, thank God. Trevor was smart enough to tell his men to take us quietly. I sat slumped in a chair in the breakfast atrium. All the ice in my almond chai melted, and my Nutella bagel cold. I don't know why I thought these 2 silly material things would make me feel better. In a way, I didn't want to feel better. I was terrified, but I was reveling in it, trying to channel it to give me strength. I'd been praying for the past 2 hours for my children's safety, but I was having trouble receiving the warm sense of calm I usually got after I spoke with him, because I was filled with rage. I'd read somewhere that a study had been done to discern which of our human emotions was the strongest, our tax dollars at work, and the hands-down winner had been maternal love. As I sat in my dimly lit atrium, trying to keep the nervous breakdown threatening the barriers of my sanity from succeeding, I knew the results of that study had been spot on. No emotion was more paralyzing than a mother's love for her children. I glanced up at the suit Trevor had left to watch me, his robotic form unmoving as he stood in front of the back door, Talia's door, looking straight ahead. I wonder where the on button is. I smirked at my little joke. I decided to stare at him until the laser beams coming out of my eyes melted his brain. 10 minutes later, 30 seconds in reality, I sighed and looked at my chai. I decided to get a fresh one and cause a little trouble. I clutched my glass and then very suddenly stood, kicking my chair out behind me and cringing as it made that irritating screech noise on the porcelain tile. My bodyguard reacted, pulling his gun and pointing it at me in one fluid motion. He was confident and steady, but I had seen something he didn't want me to see, something in his eyes for the split second before he had retrieved his weapon. It was just a flash, but I was certain it had been fear. Fabulous. It was the 2 teenage boys in the food shack all over again. Whatever Trevor had told his henchmen about me, this one was afraid I was going to hurt him. I had to laugh. I walked over to the sink, dumped out my room temperature drink, and then proceeded to wash the cup out quick, before heading to the fridge door for some ice. The whole time and with every motion, the goon's gun followed me. He was a big guy, rippling muscles bigger than even Lars possessed, and I imagined taking him down would be like trying to tackle an SUV. Trevor wasn't taking any chances when he left this behemoth with me. "You want some coffee?" I asked, as if he was a close family friend. I looked at him calmly, waiting for an answer. He was frozen, both arms outstretched to keep the pistol steady, and the barrel pointing right between my eyes. I finished making my chai and then stepped over to the coffee pot. "Take me 5 minutes. Yes? No?" I stood there, shaking the empty coffee pot in the air at him. "Come on, Body. Can I call you Body? If you plan to stay awake all night making sure I don't transform into a weapon of mass destruction, you're going to need some caffeine." I raised my eyebrows in question, waiting for any kind of response. An eye twitch, even a blink would do, but I got nothing. I set the pot down and proceeded to make the coffee anyway. It helped me think, doing mindless tasks to keep my hands busy. I thought of Ty. Trevor had taken him. Where, I didn't know, but there were 100 awful guesses chasing each other in my mind. The winner at the moment was a starport in space, where my man was being encased in carbonite by the evil Darth Trevor. I had no idea where Lars and Talia were. I needed sleep. By the time I'd started the coffee percolating, Body had relaxed his gun arm, but still clutched the revolver and was back to playing statue. But his sea-green eyes were boring holes through my head. I was going to walk past him and sit back down, my fresh chai in my hands, but before I had thought it through, I walked right up to him, nose to nose. I hadn't anticipated him being about a foot taller than me, and it ended up more like nose to sternum. I looked up at his eyes, but they were now staring straight ahead, as if he was afraid to make direct eye contact with me. A bead of sweat rolled down his forehead, and I instantly regretted my wayward instinct to flirt with him. He started to raise the gun, his hand shaking slightly. There were few things more dangerous than a scared person with a loaded weapon. For some reason, I couldn't move, couldn't back down so he would reconsider shooting me. I felt my fight or flight kick in, and something clicked in my head. Suddenly, there was a ringing in my ears. I stared at my would-be killer, and his eyes widened. He said something, but the ringing was so loud I couldn't hear him, but I was able to read his lips. He mouthed, "Your eyes." It was like a dream on fast forward. In 2 seconds, I had disarmed him and had wrenched his arm around behind him and pinned him against the wall. He had to weigh upwards of 250 pounds, and I was successfully restraining him against his will. Then the ringing stopped, and all I could hear was someone breathing heavily. It was me. I released him, horrified at what I had just done. Even though he may have decided to pull the trigger, I had definitely been antagonizing him, when he already believed me to be some sort of homicidal robot. Why had I done that? I backed away and was stopped by the edge of the atrium table behind me. The large man remained faced to the wall. He glanced back at me and then closed his eyes tight, obviously still afraid for his life. "I'm not going to hurt you," I muttered. He looked back again, but not at my face. He was focused on my right hand. I looked down and realized I was holding his gun. I immediately clicked on the safety and removed the clip. I scanned the room and then hurled the now useless pistol into the air, over my prisoner's head. It landed with a thud on the ledge above the kitchen cabinets. I set the clip down on the counter and stood there, waiting for him to relax. Instead, he whirled around, pulling a small gun out of the back of his pants, and trained it at my head. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I knew he had another gun. I was pretty sure he was going to pull it at some point. I was glad he had done it sooner than later. "And you're not going to hurt me," I said quietly. Just then Rowan wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and whimpering. "Mommy." I gave my captor a pleading look, hoping, praying he wouldn't do anything stupid. I didn't want to hurt him, but if anything happened to Rowan, I wouldn't hesitate to give in to my killer instincts. He looked even more afraid, looking frantically from me to Rowan and back to me. I motioned for him to lower his gun, and after a few seconds he did, but did not loosen his grip on it. I turned and went to my baby. "What's wrong, honey?" I sat down in my chair at the atrium table and pulled him into my arms. "I had a bad dream, and you weren't in your bed." "I'm sorry, sweetie." Rowan seemed to become more alert and noticed that we had company. "Who are you?" he asked the man directly, who had managed to conceal the gun behind his back just before Rowan turned to him. I released a near-silent exhale of relief. "Rowan, this is a friend of Daddy's." "What's your name?" The man looked at me questioningly, and I cocked my head at him, pursing my lips and raising my eyebrows. "Tell him your name, stupid," I ordered him with my mind. He opened his mouth, but no sound came at first. Then he managed a squeaky, "Cole." He cleared his throat and said it again, this time in his real, Vin Diesel-esque throaty rumble. Rowan smiled at him, then looked back at me and yawned. Then he asked, "Is it morning, Mommy?" I grinned. "Look outside." He looked past me out the atrium windows. "It's still dark." "It's still dark," I repeated, "and you should be in bed." "I want to sleep with you," he whined. "All right, I was just coming up. Let's go." I stood and guided my 4-year-old toward the living room, pushing him in front of me. I turned to my new friend. "Good night, Cole," I said. "Good night, Cole," Rowan mimicked. I made eye contact with the stranger in my kitchen, and his expression softened a little. Right before I lost sight of him, I saw him return his gun to the back of his waistband, and I swear he gave me a slight nod. I was surprised when I fell almost immediately to sleep, Rowan breathing softly next to me. I awoke with a start at a loud crash from downstairs. I rolled over and checked the clock. 8:17 a.m. The boys, they had to be up by now. It was Saturday, and they had taekwondo practice at 9. If Cole let us leave the house, that is. I leapt out of bed and noticed Rowan was gone. I ran down the stairs so fast I barely touched a step. As I rounded the corner from the living room into the kitchen, I saw the boys. All 3 of them were dressed for taekwondo, and they were standing over something on the kitchen floor. "Levi," I started, and they turned and looked at me. Levi's eyes were alive with adrenaline, and Blaze looked like he'd just found out we were going to Disney World. They were both in defensive taekwondo positions. Rowan ran over to me. "Mommy, Daddy's friend had a gun, and I don't think it was a toy gun like mine." I looked up at Levi. "What happened?" "Mom," he huffed, "who is this man?" I walked over to them and saw Cole sprawled out on the floor at their feet, unconscious. "Levi, what happened?" I asked more insistently. "We came into the kitchen to get some breakfast, and he was sitting at the atrium table, sleeping, with a gun in his hand." "So you knocked him out? While he was asleep?" I tried to sound angry, but I was just so proud. "No, Rowan went up to him and shook his shoulder to wake him up, and the guy jumped up and pointed the gun at him." Blaze cut in. "Yeah, and then Levi yelled, 'Attack,' just like our teacher does, and we both kicked him." "Kicked him?" I had to hear the details. This was going to be the best Saturday ever. "Levi did this awesome roundhouse kick right in the guy's chest, and then I got him right in his chicken nuggets." Blaze was clearly having as good a Saturday as I was so far. "If I promise to tell you everything, will you trust me and do whatever I say?" I asked. They all 3 nodded silently. "Good. Now we need to tie him up. Levi, do you remember your knots from Boy Scouts?" He grinned at me excitedly. "I'll go get my rope." I looked down at the unconscious, muscle-bound trained killer on my floor, who had been taken down by 2 boys with 18 months of taekwondo experience, and smiled.
You're listening to Big World Network.